What if I told you that buried beneath the desert sands of Iraq, archaeologists uncovered clay tablets that completely contradict everything we've been taught about human civilization? And what if these weren't just random artifacts, but detailed records describing advanced knowledge that shouldn't have existed over 5,000 years ago? This isn't science fiction. This is about the Sumerians, and what they left behind might just rewrite human history as we know it. Before we dive into this rabbit hole, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because what we're about to uncover will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about our ancestors. Trust me, you'll want to be here for what's coming. So here's the deal. We're talking about ancient Sumeria, one of the world's first civilizations that emerged around 4500 BCE in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. Now, you probably remember learning about them in school as the people who invented writing and the wheel. Cool, right? But that's just scratching the surface, and honestly, it's the boring part. What they don't tell you in textbooks is what the Sumerians actually wrote about. And when you start reading their tablets, things get weird. Really weird. Let's start with something that should be impossible. The Sumerians had detailed knowledge of our solar system that we didn't rediscover until the invention of modern telescopes. We're talking thousands of years later. They described planets, their colors, their sizes, and get this, they knew about planets that weren't officially discovered until the 1800s and 1900s. How does that even happen? How does an ancient civilization with no telescopes know about Uranus and Neptune? These planets are invisible to the naked eye. You literally cannot see them without advanced equipment. Yet there they are, described in Sumerian texts with stunning accuracy. But it gets crazier. The Sumerians didn't just write about our solar system. They claimed to know where humanity came from. And according to their records, we didn't exactly evolve the way Darwin suggested. Now, before you click away thinking this is some conspiracy theory channel, just hear me out. Because what I'm about to share comes directly from translated clay tablets that are sitting in museums right now. The Sumerians wrote extensively about beings they called the Anunnaki. The name literally translates to those who from heaven to earth came. According to thousands of tablets, these weren't gods in the mythological sense. These were actual beings from another planet who came to Earth with a specific purpose. And that purpose? Mining gold. I know what you're thinking. This sounds like ancient aliens territory. But stay with me, because the details matter here. The Sumerian texts don't describe this as mythology or poetry. They describe it as history, as matter of fact, as we would describe World War II. They provide names, dates, lineages, and specific events with the kind of detail you'd find in historical records, not religious texts. According to these tablets, the Anunnaki came to Earth roughly 450,000 years ago. They needed gold to save their planet's atmosphere. They initially mined it themselves, but the work was brutal and they eventually revolted. So their chief scientist, a guy named Enki, proposed a solution: create a worker race by genetically modifying the primitive humans that already existed on Earth. This is where it gets absolutely mind-blowing. The Sumerians described a process that sounds eerily similar to genetic engineering. They talk about taking the essence of the Anunnaki and mixing it with the clay of Earth, which many researchers interpret as mixing Anunnaki DNA with early hominid DNA. The result? Modern humans, Homo sapiens. Now, I'm not saying this is definitely what happened, but what I am saying is that this is what the Sumerians, one of the most advanced ancient civilizations, recorded as their history. And modern science has some interesting things to say about this. Here's something that'll make you think. Scientists have long called it the missing link problem. Human evolution has this weird gap where Homo sapiens suddenly appeared with dramatically increased brain capacity, advanced cognitive abilities, and capabilities that seem to jump forward way faster than normal evolution would suggest. It's like we went from 0 to 60 in evolutionary terms. Mainstream science explains this with various theories about environmental pressures and natural selection. But even scientists admit the rapid advancement is unusual. The Sumerian texts? They have a very different explanation for that sudden leap. Let's talk about what else is in these tablets, because the Anunnaki story is just one piece of this puzzle. The Sumerians had mathematics that would make your high school calculus teacher weep. They used a base 60 number system, which is why we have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour today. We literally still use their system. But why base 60? It's incredibly sophisticated and allows for complex astronomical calculations. These people could calculate the precession of the equinoxes, a phenomenon that takes 25,120 years to complete one full cycle. Think about that. They could track and calculate a celestial event that takes almost 26,000 years. How? Why? What ancient civilization needs that level of astronomical knowledge just to plant crops and build cities? And their medical knowledge? Absolutely insane. Clay tablets describe surgical procedures, the diagnosis of diseases, and pharmaceutical remedies using minerals and plants. They performed eye surgery, brain surgery, and had medical instruments that wouldn't look out of place in a pre-modern hospital. One tablet describes the human body as having a circulatory system centered around the heart, pumping blood throughout the body. That's something we didn't officially discover until William Harvey described it in 1628. The Sumerians wrote about it over 4,000 years earlier. Here's another thing that'll blow your mind. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest known pieces of literature, comes from Sumeria. And if you've read the Bible, parts of this epic might sound familiar. A great flood, a man who builds an ark, animals saved in pairs, a bird sent out to find dry land. Sound familiar? That's because the story of Noah's Ark appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh, written at least 1,000 years before the Bible. Now, I'm not here to challenge anyone's religious beliefs, but this raises some serious questions about where these stories originated and what event they might be describing. Was there really a great flood? Interestingly, flood myths appear in cultures all around the world. The Sumerians, the Hebrews, the Greeks, the Hindus, Native American tribes, and ancient Chinese texts all describe a catastrophic flood that nearly wiped out humanity. That's not a coincidence. Something happened. Geological evidence actually supports the possibility of a massive flood in the Mesopotamian region around 2900 BCE. But the Sumerian texts describe it as not just a natural disaster, but a deliberate act by the Anunnaki to wipe out humanity because we had become too numerous and too noisy. According to the tablets, one Anunnaki named Enki secretly warned a human named Zusudra to build a boat and save himself, his family, and animals. This story was later adapted into various cultures, eventually becoming the Noah story we know today. But here's what really gets me. Why would multiple ancient civilizations, separated by thousands of miles and with no contact with each other, all have the same story about a great flood? What were they remembering? Let's shift gears and talk about Sumerian technology, because this is where things get really controversial. In 1936, while excavating near Baghdad, archaeologists found a clay jar containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod. When they tested it, they discovered it was a functioning battery, a 2,000-year-old battery. Now, imagine what else they might have had that we haven't found yet or didn't recognize. The Sumerians also described flying vehicles. They called them shems, which is often translated as rocket ships by some researchers. Their depictions show cone-shaped objects with flames coming out the bottom. Ancient rocket ships, or just mythological symbolism? You decide. But get this. At multiple Sumerian sites, archaeologists have found strange evidence of extreme heat. We're talking temperatures hot enough to turn sand into glass. The same kind of effect you see at nuclear test sites. Now, there are natural explanations for this, like lightning strikes, but the scale and locations have made some researchers wonder if ancient texts describing weapons of the gods might have been describing something very real and very advanced. I want to be clear here. I'm not saying ancient Sumerians had nuclear weapons, but I am saying there's physical evidence that doesn't quite fit the narrative we've been told, and it lines up with what their texts describe. Here's another wild one. The Sumerian king list, a tablet that records the kings of Sumeria, lists rulers and their reign lengths. But the early kings? They supposedly reigned for thousands of years each. One king allegedly ruled for 43,200 years. Obviously, that's impossible, right? But what if they were measuring time differently? Or what if these weren't human kings at all, but the Anunnaki, who, according to the texts, lived for thousands of years? The tablets describe the Anunnaki as nearly immortal compared to humans, with lifespans that would seem impossible to us. And here's where it connects to modern science in a weird way. We now know that aging is largely caused by cellular degradation and telomere shortening. We also know that different animals age at different rates based on their biology. Is it really that crazy to think that beings from a different planet might have biology that allows for radically different lifespans? Let's talk about Zecharia Sitchin, because you can't discuss Sumerian tablets without mentioning this guy. He was a researcher and author who spent decades translating these tablets and wrote extensively about the Anunnaki theory. His most famous claim was about a planet called Nibiru, which the Sumerians supposedly described as the home of the Anunnaki. According to Sitchin's translation, Nibiru is a massive planet with an elliptical orbit that brings it into our solar system every 3,600 years. When it comes close, the Anunnaki would visit Earth. Now, mainstream scientists and even many Sumerian language scholars dispute Sitchin's translations, calling them inaccurate or overly literal. But here's what's interesting. In recent years, astronomers have been searching for what they call Planet 9, a theoretical massive planet in the outer reaches of our solar system. They've noticed gravitational anomalies that suggest something big is out there, pulling on other objects. They haven't found it yet, but the math says it should be there. Is it Nibiru? Probably not in the way Sitchin described, but it's fascinating that ancient texts talked about additional planets in our solar system, and modern science is now saying, yeah, there might actually be something out there we haven't discovered yet. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Why isn't this stuff taught in schools? Why isn't this mainstream knowledge? The answer is complicated. First, academic institutions are incredibly conservative when it comes to rewriting established history. There's a lot of professional reputation and funding tied to current historical models. Suggesting that ancient aliens played a role in human development is career suicide for most archaeologists and historians. Second, there's the translation issue. Sumerian is a dead language. Nobody speaks it. Our understanding of it comes from comparing it to later languages like Akkadian and from context clues. Different scholars translate the same tablets differently. What one researcher sees as describing genetic engineering, another sees as metaphorical language about gods creating humans from clay. But here's what nobody disputes. The Sumerians were incredibly advanced for their time. Impossibly advanced in some areas. They had knowledge that shouldn't have existed yet, and their records consistently describe interactions with beings from the sky who gave them this knowledge. Whether you believe those beings were extraterrestrials, time travelers, a lost advanced human civilization, or just mythology, the fact remains that the Sumerians wrote it down, preserved it, and wanted future generations to know about it. So what does this all mean? What if even 10% of what the Sumerian tablets describe is literally true? What if humanity really was genetically modified by an advanced species? What if the gods of ancient mythology were actual beings with advanced technology that seemed like magic to primitive humans? It would mean everything we think we know about human history, human origin, and our place in the universe is wrong. It would mean we're not alone, and never were. It would mean our creation wasn't random chance, but intentional design. And it would mean that the story of humanity is far stranger and more incredible than we ever imagined. Here's my take. I think ancient civilizations like the Sumerians knew things we've forgotten. I think there are gaps in our understanding of human history that don't quite add up. And I think we've been too quick to dismiss ancient texts as primitive mythology when they might be describing real events in the only language and framework they had available. Do I think ancient aliens definitely created humanity? I'm not going to make that claim, but do I think we should take these records seriously and investigate them with open minds and modern technology? Absolutely. The Sumerian tablets are sitting in museums right now. They're available for anyone to study. The evidence is there, written in clay, preserved for thousands of years, waiting for us to figure out what it really means. And maybe, just maybe, when we finally understand what the Sumerians were trying to tell us, it really will change everything we know about humanity. If this video got you thinking, do me a favor and smash that like button. Drop a comment and tell me what you think. Are the Sumerian texts describing actual history or elaborate mythology? Are we alone in the universe, or are we the descendants of something far more extraordinary? And if you want more content that challenges everything you thought you knew, subscribe and hit that notification bell because we're just getting started. There's so much more to uncover, and trust me, it only gets more interesting from here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.